for those who were not here last week, let me share my screen. We simply decided to Jordi, can you designate me?
You can already. Sorry, I did while you were saying it.
Okay, sorry. So for those who, so can you see the screen? I hope yes.
Yes, we can.
So basically, what I proposed for the very first session are our session that is that would address more people who begin their journey to with a free router. So the idea is to use these two websites as a material so that we can progress and at least discuss all together if you have any question. The first website on the right is freerouter.net. This is the control plane that we are using. And on the left, we have also the corresponding documentation to the RAR/free router project. The main difference between the two, I'm pretty sure that it can confuse you, but at some point you have to imagine that one very good comparison can be the GNU/Linux project. Basically, the GNU is an umbrella project for free software, and Linux is the kernel adopted by the GNU project. Similarly, you have the RAR/free router project, and basically RAR is the umbrella project for the whole routing open source platform, who has chosen free router as the control plane. So you can think about this. In order to start our journey, last week we went through the first article, which is Hello Free Router, and I invite you, for those who were not here, to go through this this article that we explained last week. Basically, what we did is that we simply explained how free router in a nutshell was working and was leveraging UDP sockets in order to send and receive packets on a local system. It's not rocket science, so it will take maybe 10 minutes for you to just cut and paste and make it work, assuming that you have already a Linux OS with you. And we started with a basic configuration and started one router that has two configuration file. One that is the hardware configuration file here with these two lines, and the second file, which is the software. There is still missing the software configuration guide. Sorry, the software configuration file.
Frédéric, may I ask you to the screen? It's quite small. If you have the two sites open, if you can increase a little bit. I don't know if I am the only one. It's not a problem, but
yeah,
the font is very small.
It's actually quite. Are you in full screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let me try to.
No, it's okay.
Is it better like that?
Ah, yeah, perfect. For me, it's perfect.
Is it better for everyone? So we have this hardware configuration and software configuration file, and we learned how to install it. It was really simple. It's not rocket science. Today, we will take the example of creating multiple free router instance and create a topology that is described in the page you are seeing here. We are considering a square topology with R1, R2, R3, and R4. what you can see is that R1 is connected to R2 with edge 1. Sorry, via Ethernet 1. Oh, sorry, and R2 are connected and R4 are connected using Ethernet 2 port. Same goes for R3 and R4, which are connected via their Ethernet 1 port, and R3 and R1 connected via Ethernet 2. So we are following the same philosophy like last week. We are creating two files. One that is the hardware files. Sorry. One that is the hardware file, and the second one, which is the software, the configuration file. Okay. So the software configuration file corresponds to the router configuration you already know if you are very familiar to Cisco or Juniper routers. And the hardware configuration file basically lists some hardware knob in which you can see how that where the interfaces are defined. So if you look at it, we have R1 that has Ethernet 1 and Ethernet 2. Okay, so we have Ethernet 1, Ethernet 2 with a with an internal MAC address. Of course, that should be and the famous Unix UDP socket 1001 and 2001. Ethernet 2 has a Unix socket localhost 1002 and 3002. If you remember last week, we took a specific convention while defining the router. If you remember, we had 1001, which designate router 1 with Ethernet 1. And then you have router 1 and 002, and the 2 is Ethernet 2. So if we are following this naming convention rules and socket attribution, here we have localhost, okay, 2, which is router 2 at Ethernet 1. And Ethernet 2 here, the second port, has localhost, which is connected to router 3 via Ethernet 2 ports. So why I am talking about this is that I'm taking the opportunity to look at the diagram that you can see here. R1 is connected to R2 via Ethernet 1. So we have Ethernet ETH1 socket belonging to R1 connected to R2, which is 2001. Okay. Same goes for Ethernet 2 here. R1 is connected to R3. We have socket 1002, so Ethernet 2, that is connected to router 3, Ethernet 2, which is as per the diagram. So if you follow these rules, for you, it will be a no-brainer to understand why we are writing these lines. R2 here is connected to, has Ethernet 1, 2001 connected to R1 at Ethernet 1, and ETH2 that is connected, that is Ethernet 2 at router 2 connected to router 4, Ethernet 2. And if you look at the diagram, this is the case. So same goes for R3 and R4. So far, we have just defined the topology. And here we have created a very simple router configuration that is following the bundle demo that you will find on the FreeRouter when you are downloading FreeRouter Turbo. So if you look at it, the idea here is that we are using simple IPv4 and IPv6 naming convention rules. And the idea is to have interconnectivity between them. So I assume that you are very familiar with IPv4 and IPv6 interconnection, and this is a /30, and here a /64. We will go. I will let you define this configuration then. And what we will do is that now together, now that we have defined our topology locally, what we can do is simply to start this router. So far, any question? No? So here we are starting the router. We are starting router 1. Sorry. Let's do the same with router 2. Router 3. And router 4. So again, the how to launch pre-router in its simplest form is to download the RTR jar file from prerouter.net using a parameter router S with that will designate that will ask the use of a hardware and a software file. And C means I would like to have a console. So that's why we have a console here. So Java using the jar trigger with RTR, the jar, router SC, and the 2 configuration files we have just defined all together. So all of these are up and running. So if you remember, we had also a knob that allow you to telnet the router, which is 2321. So let me show you this again. Let's stop R1. Okay. If I want to telnet the router again, it's not working. So this is normal because the process is not listening. But if you look at the hardware file, R1 hardware file, what you can see is that we have defined these 2 interfaces, but we had a knob that we have declared, which is TCP to VRF 2321 in VRF v1, and that is redirected to port to free router internal network namespace 23. Okay, hardware ID is simply the name of the platform I used. Okay, so this is why here we have this TCP to VRF knob that is saying that port 2321 in VRF v1 is redirected to the internal free router port 23. I'm talking under Xaba's validation, who is also on the VC. He can maybe correct if I have any if I'm using any wrong wording anyway. So again, it's not working, and then now let's start it. Sorry, let's start R1 as it was before. And when it started, you can see that now R1 is alive and kicking. It's working again. So in order to illustrate this TCP to VRF stanza, in the configuration file, so all of this, if you have, I invite you to look at the video last week. I think that will be published. We'll find a way to publish it in in YouTube or another way to means to publish this video. But I explained last week that we defined a server telnet stanza, and this server telnet is bound to a VRF, to what we call a VRF, because as I said last week, free router, in free router, you don't have the concept of default or invisible global VRF. Everything has to be in VRF, and this is a very clever choice that Xabaz adopted, simply because with this in mind, you just realize that everything can be sliced in a VRF, in a VRF. What does it mean? It means that if you, for example, are used to use other router like Cisco or Juniper routers, you usually have a default BGP protocol, and you can have mostly only one. The consequence is in having everything inside and embedded into and isolated into a VRF namespace is that in each router, you can have an unlimited number of protocol per VRF. So you can have 10 BGP routers in your route in R1 without any I would say conflict. For those who are familiar with Junos, you have this concept of logical router, where you create a logical router and then you have this default BGP. And this is how, with other platform, you can create multiple BGP process. In this case, it's not it's not the case. Everything is bound naturally inside the VRF. So this is a very powerful concept. That being said, the server telnet is bound to the VRF v1, and it's talking telnet protocol in port 23. For now, we won't complexify the exercise. We will just use telnet, but you have to know that our free router is also to handle SSH type of connection type. So this is quite interesting if you are in a, would say, insecure domain. But in my case, I will just use telnet as I'm really local to my virtual machine running on my laptop. So I don't think that I have I would say an insecure context. At least I'm not aware of that. So telnet, server telnet v1 is bound to VRF1. And if you look at on the left-hand side, we have this this definition in the hardware file, TCP to VRF, that is redirecting port 2321 to port 23 in VRF v1. And this is where the VRF v1 is very useful in this case. If for any reason, for example, I would have put a VRF v2 or internet or iNet, whatever, and left here v1, it wouldn't work. The internet connection would not have been possible. So if you are okay, let's do this together. So I will here on the router R1 hardware file, I will put here VRF v666, which is the evil VRF. And if I'm trying to, sorry. So of course it will work. But if I try to telnet it, it's not working. Why? It's simply because the VRF definition here is tied to v1. if for any reason I wanted to make it work for VRF 666, I would have to do two things. Two things in the software configuration file. Let's do this together. It can be interesting. So now I am editing manually the configuration because I cannot access FreeRouter. But what I would have to do is I would have to create a VRF 666. So let's do this together. 666. So this is the first thing. Sorry, it says it's a read only. So let me try to become super user first. So no, that's this one. But this one. So first, I would have to create a new VRF, which is VRF 666. Okay. But this is not over, because what we said is that everything should be encapsulated inside the VRF. So in that case, I would have to also bind this telnet server to VRF 666. And then after having done these two things, we have, of course, to log out and log in again. Sorry. And then it works again. So this is this is a very important concept that I have demonstrated here, this VRF concept, and also the syntax that comes in the hardware configuration file.
Sorry to interrupt, Frederic.
Yes.
There was a question. Why do we have two telnet definitions, two server telnet definitions there? So we have tel and v1.
Sorry. This is a very good question. Actually, this is a default configuration file, and in this case, we can have only one. Of course, we can delete it. Sorry, it was simply a cut and paste from the configuration file. Does it answer the question? Sorry, it's you can remove it if you want.
Yeah, but initially there were already two server telnet definitions. One is with logging and the other one without, right? Is that the difference?
One is sorry, let me show you. So this is a default configuration, and I unintentionally left this useless telnet server. So let's focus on this one. Does it answer the question?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay. So Xaba, correct me if I'm wrong. It's just I'm used to cut and paste the stuff, and maybe there is some useless stanza here. But anyway, I guess you have spotted the idea of creating this server telnet, binding it to a specific VRF, and of course this VRF should be part of what we call should be included in the hardware definition file. Okay. So that being said, here you see that we have. Please don't take into account this ETH3. We will see this ETH3 in a subsequent session. The idea here is that we will use this to connect the free router that is local to the VM to the external world, but we will see that later. So another keyword here in the hardware file is HWID. And here I put my Debian VM. Okay, so it's not something that is, I think, not vital in order to have it working. But if you look at it, this is the output of the show platform. Here you have hardware ID, my Debian. So basically what you are doing is that when you are using your favorite CMDB software, what you can do is that you can issue a show platform and then use also a show run or show start configuration in order to fetch the configuration and backup it. And the idea here is that FreeRouter is able to run on multiple platforms. It can run on specific server, but it can also run on specific white box like P4 switch, where you can and this is why you have the possibility to define your hardware ID. This is a free. This is a string that will help you to interrogate to keep track of all your FreeRouter deployment depending on the platform you can have. You can deploy some FreeRouter using GPDK, using P4 Tofino ASIC, for example, and also just running a plain native forwarder using UDP socket or libpcap flavor with FreeRouter. And this is where you can put, for example, this information. So the output of this platform is very intuitive. You have the uptime, the reload here. As we are running in a specific mode, I think it's there is no reload. There is no reload the code because I just issued a control break here. We have the hardware configuration here in the, and software configuration. And this is some characteristic that is provided by the Java virtual machine. And this is where you can have this information all together. Show platform. You have also a very good command that is show version, where you can fetch the version and the license of FreeRouter and also some codes from Xaba. And here you can assume that you are almost at home if you are very familiar with a Cisco router. However, let's go back to the example for today, which is basically we have created this topology. So I'm taking it slow, very slowly, but and maybe this is trivial for most of you, but the real it's really important to have this basics concept in mind, related to how the sockets, the UDP sockets are built and how it is connected. We'll see later how, based on assuming that we are aware of that, we can do more things with binding this socket to existing Linux interface, but we'll see that later. The most important things here is that you have created a topology that is local to your VM. It is self-contained, it is isolated, so it won't disrupt your routing, your network equipment if you are in your company. This is really, and you have defined interconnection between this router. When you will have started all of this router, you will see that, for example, what you can do is that you can directly ping your neighbor, and this is the next step. Actually, when you have deployed this topology, you are just doing your verification, and this verification will help you validate that your topology is valid and is working as expected. So this is the explanation I just explained 20 minutes ago. Let's do a basic verification after having launched this router. So, so you have some comments that are very useful here. You have the show internet summary, in which you can see all the logical interface and interface that are on the router. You have the show interface description, which is of course empty, at least except for Ethernet 3 here in this case. And if for any reason you want to also know the IP address, you have show IPv4 interface here. You have the loopback and the interface we have defined in our configuration here. Sorry, let me go back to our one here. You have 1111/30 and 1115/30. Okay. So we have activated LDP in order to simplify our life and on all the routers, and we see that we have LDP. We have direct connected neighbors, which are R2 and R3. And one thing that is important here is that we have IP address 1111, and we have R2 that is connected at Ethernet 1111 via his Ethernet 1 interface with IP address 1112. So let's try to ping this. So I will deliberately use a VRF that is that does not exist here. You will see that VRF is not specified. Again, everything is on a VRF. And here I'm trying to ping something in VRF 6666. And why it does not work? Maybe you know the answer, Jordi. Jordi?
Sorry. I was doing all the stuff at the same time. My bad.
I'm kidding. So maybe you know the answer of this question. Let's try Italo. Do you see why it's not working?
Yeah, the VRF name, it's V1.
Exactly. So you're ready to get certified, to have your certification easily. So as said, and of course, you are totally right, Italo, in this case. The VRF here is tied to VRF. It's a local concept. Okay, if you want a similar if you want a similar terminology, Cisco call this VRF Lite. VRF Lite is a way to create local VRF and give them local significance only. And in this case, we have created two VRF, VRF 666 and VRF 1. And we have bound Ethernet 1 to VRF V1. And we are trying to ping something that is in a VRF that simply does not exist. And this is this is a very good answer, Italo, because now I think you can run your free router network soon. So let's try to do the same ping, but now in V1. And let's repeat with let's send 100 packets. And let's use a source interface, which is interface ETH1. And it works. So of course, I'm just showing you how to use the ping command with some options. But of course, there is default. Xaba has, of course, anticipated the idea that you have default commands. So the first repeat is 5, the default is 5. And the interface is I think it's the default outgoing interface that is connected. Okay, so of course it's working, and this is at that point. If you at that point, if you follow the topology, this is the only thing we can check. We can check, of course, IPv6 if you want. Yeah. Let's now try IPv6, but with Ethernet 2. Okay. In which VRF should I ping, Xavier? Now maybe you cannot talk, Xavier, but anyway. So Xavier, yes, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so your IPv6 is in VRF1 too, no?
Yes, exactly. You're right, totally right. So let's try to look at Ethernet 2 configuration, and here, of course, we have VRF forwarding v1. So now you have understood a very key concept, very powerful concept related to free router. And if you look at it, this is the only thing we can verify for now, as we have enabled interconnectivity. This connectivity is ensured with a specific socket allocation. And that's pretty much about it. Yeah. So feel free to cut and paste all of these examples, and we can of course discuss during the next session if you have any issue with that. And I guess that for today it's enough. We can go over the next concept for the next session. It's really important for you that you go through this first example and create this topology all together. Next time we will make sure that we can make the existing running network aware of the existence of free router.
May I ask you a question about?
Of course.
If I would like to look at into the Linux VMs that host the routers, I just have to look at the socket that is open, or I don't know if is there any interest to do this, but just to look if it is possible to look if the socket that is open for router 1 Ethernet 1 is really connected to router 2 Ethernet 1 and so on. Is it possible?
So this is a very good question, actually, and it gives me the opportunity to show you some basic verification steps. You see here that we have launched 4 Java processes. Okay. So the first thing that you can check is how many processes are running the Java process. So you are using you can launch. You have various ways to do that, but I like the pdof command, pdof Java, and you see that we have 4 processes: R1, R2. Maybe I'm not sure about them, but these are one of them. This is in a specific random order, I think. It's the Java process for R1, R2, R3, R4. I grab Java. And if you see here, you have the same process. So 1817 is for R3, okay? And 48888 is for R1. So basically, one is for R4. So this is unordered, okay? So this is the first thing to verify. You have launched Java, and you see that you have you can see this process running. if you have launched the router and you don't see the process, it means that at some point there is an issue related to the configuration. There is a glitch. If you manually try to do some configuration using your favorite text editor and put accidentally inside some typo, it might break it might prevent the free router to start. The first thing. The second thing is that you can check the socket allocation. And as you see here, sorry, the server, the listening server here, you remember the TCP to VRF 23, 21, 23, 22, 23, 23, 23, 24. You can see all of these here. So this is the listening telnet server. Now, I'm not sure if I have this command. Oops, sorry. So you can list, you can try to list all the sockets that are, maybe we can do this. Okay, sorry. So if you can see here, you can see the UDP socket. The UDP socket here that are connected. Does it answer your question, Xavier?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
It's a great question because to be honest with you, I'm usually not checking socket connection because I'm not using. There are specific cases where you are using native UDP sockets opposed to other data plane like DPDK or P4. But for example, in the home router that I'm using DPDK, and this is why I'm not using this this socket. This gives me also the opportunity to show you this link, which is blog.freerouter.net. It leads you to the blog we are maintaining, and here this is my home router that I'm using, and actually all the packets going through the in order to handle this VC is going through this equipment right now. So here I'm using DPDK, and of course I'm not using the UDP socket, but there are there is a specific use case where you would use a UDP socket. And let me show you the link here. That's this one. Sorry, it's a little bit tedious. Oh no, it's before. This one.
Is it before EMU or not? Oh.
Sorry. No, there is a very specific use case. With a specific use case, imagine you want to create a very big route reflector. In this particular case, you really don't need to activate any data plane because BGP discussion is not so demanding. And actually, if you look at the design papers, the BGP route reflector should not be on the data path. So what does it mean? It means that you don't need a lot of a big capacity. You don't need a 100 gig connection for a route reflector. And this is why, for example, here, if you want to create this use case, you really don't need to activate and complexify your system with an additional data plane. Just use the UDP socket native forwarding I just described here, and you are good to go. This is really not needed to connect your route reflector with DPDK or P4, and it's really a specific use case that that is not requiring high data throughput. I invite you to read this blog article, which if you want to create or build a route reflector for your network backbone, keep in mind that this the route reflector that is described here can handle very big network internet service provider core backbone. I'm really I really challenge you to find a limitation on this type of design. It's really a powerful route reflector. Just to give you an example, there is no equivalent in other commercial vendor. I mean, for now, if you have a server with 60 gig of RAM, and you are very good to go and activate a lot of peering, BGP peering on it. We have 10 minutes left. Do you have any question, specific question, even if it is not related to what you have seen so far?
I think, unless there is a question from the audience, I would highlight in this VRF approach that Saba followed, and which is quite interesting. And maybe Saba would want to speak more about it. The hairpin capability that FreeRouter offers in order to bypass, let's say, the VRF isolation when desired. I think it's quite interesting, and I don't know if, or maybe it's for another call. Just
no, Saba can bring his insight related to hairpin. This is a great remark, Jordi, because VRF guarantee isolation, but Saba, of course, has some arrows in his sleeve in order to enable connectivity between this isolated VRF.
So basically, hairpin is a special kind of interface that is internal to a router. And when you create a hairpin, you basically create a pair of hairpin interfaces. Yes, I have a lot of tests for it. Maybe it would be easier if we pick one. So when you create a single hairpin, then you create a pair of hairpin interfaces, and when you send the packet to the left side of the hairpin, then that packet arrives on the right side of the hairpin, and basically that's it.
For speaking about use case, for instance, in my case, I have a VRF which is completely isolated of the internet, but I would want to access a certain web server for pushing or FTP. So basically, with the hairpin, you can also have the ACLs on them. So basically, you can just allow that VRF to access something special. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, so basically, hairpin is nothing special interface. You can pass traffic between two VRFs. You can apply ACLs. You can do anything on the hairpin interface as on a normal interface.
Do you have to manage these as a route? You say, okay, if you want to access, for instance, a specific server or specific address, it is hairpin is the route for this one, for this IP, for instance, or something like. Is it the way you use it?
So you can do basically with the route target import export, but hairpin gives you more control because you can filter between the two VRFs with the ACLs. So yes, I think hairpin is the best.
So is it okay for you, for example, Frank? Not sure if you are with us. Yes.
I am. Yes, Frederick. Yes, it looks good. Looks very nice.
I mean, is the hairpin concept is clear for you?
Well, the VRF is, I'm familiar with Cisco switches and routers, and you know, the VRF is a particular, I suppose there are, you know, differences. So I do appreciate that, you know, that there has to be an ingress and an egress for packets. So, you know, so that's why the hairpin has to be, my understanding then is that the hairpin has to have two ends to it to carry the packet.
Exactly. So just to let you know, Italo and Frank, as you might not be super familiar with the hairpin concept, these are simply also called from in the Junos world, this is called logical tunnel interface. And these logical tunnel interfaces are usually logical interface that you are creating that has basically both ends of the hairpin. So in this case, for example, we are creating hairpin 1, and automatically there is interface hairpin 1.1 and hairpin 1.2 appearing. So let's have some fun and let's do this together. If you are okay during the next thing. So show hairpin 1. Okay, so there is no hairpin. So let's create one. Conf t hairpin 1. Let's end this. So what happened here? You just realize that by creating this hairpin 1, automatically, FreeRouter created two interfaces that are both ends of the hairpin 1. And in this case, what we can do with a hairpin as a logical interface is to stitch two different VRF and have traffic passing by through this hairpin. And if you want, and the great thing here is that what you can do is that you can associate ingress or egress ACLs on the interface in order to filter legitimate or illegitimate traffic between the two VRF. This is a very powerful concept here. And these interfaces are VRF forwarding, for example, V1, IP address, IPv4 address, sorry, address 6.6.6.11/24. And let's do the same thing with hairpin 1.2. To VRF forwarding 666, okay, and put here an IP address 66/24. Maybe not. Yes, we can, Xaba. I think you will have to be in the same subnet.
Yes, you should.
And then you have show run hairpin. And what you have done is that you have stitched these two VRF, using this interconnectivity subnet, and they can and you can ping both of them. You can ping, for example, let's try to do this. Ping 666 from VRF. I think it's V1. Okay, so it just works. You have something that is in VRF v66, pingable from VRF v1, and this is what we have done. And this is very powerful.
You don't have to specify that it is through the interface hairpin 11.
No, because if you look at the show IPv4 route v1.
Yes, v1.
If you look at v1, we pinged in v1, okay?
Yeah.
But you have this local interface here, which is the hairpin 11. So the routing table is seeing this.
Yes, but you ping the 66. You have also a route.
Yeah,
You have a route to 66.0 that is going through hairpin 11. Okay.
exactly.
Automatically added. Okay, perfect.
Exactly.
That was my question. Thank you.
Let me show you the routing table from V666. Okay. It's an empty table because, of course, I did not put any interface on them. But I could have created sub-interface here. I could have, for example, show run ETH. Here I could have created ETH 2.666 and also interface Ethernet 2.1 that is connected to V1. And I could have a totally different backbone. And this is the idea of the hairpin. Okay, is it clear for everyone?
Yes, thank you.
It's super important and great because sometimes you want to do filtering between VRF. Let's assume that you have a community that you have a that is terminating a tunnel in a specific VRF, and then you want to inject all of this traffic into a different VRF for routing purpose. But you want to do filtering at the same time. So you create this hairpin, and you are doing the filtering at this precise point, and then you are pretty sure that you have your security is precisely located at this hairpin interface. However, as all powerful mechanism, there is a trade-off. Hairpin is I would say, logical. So at some point, it has to be pointed into the CPU and processed by the CPU because it's logical. And this is where if you are using this mechanism a lot, this mechanism, you have to know that there will be more this will be more CPU intensive. Jordi, does it?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I mean, if you want to provide, let's say, a stable output for a VRF, probably you will just put another interface connected to it, right? With kind of NAT or whatever you need there. But in some cases, it's just something that you need for something really temporal, even, right? To provide access just for installations and things like that. So I think it's interesting.
So we have 1 minute left before the end of this second session. If you remember, I did not save the configuration. So I will reuse a command that I introduced last week. The show config difference show you the difference between the running config in memory and the startup config that is written on the file. If for any reason, I just realized that sorry. Sorry, it's config revert, I think. No,
yes, it is.
Revert, sorry. If I want to do config revert here, but before doing it, show run hairpin, you see that you have this in the running config. But now I want to config revert. Okay, you see on the left, a lot of things have happened. Show run hairpin, and you don't have any more hairpin. So I just got rid of all the changes I did with you, which is great because I don't want to save them. It was just for example. Anyway, thank you for being here today for the second session. For the next session, we will talk about how to advertise, I would say, to make your local area network aware that free router, because for now we are working on a topology that is totally isolated in the VM. This topology is really a self-contained topology ensured by UDP Unix socket. And now the idea would be to advertise one interface in the real world, and we will see that in the next session, if you will. Any Last question before ending this session.
You mentioned that the video from the previous section was available in YouTube.
Yes. Sorry, it's not available in YouTube, but we are thinking about having them in available, publicly available. So maybe it will be on YouTube or another channel if, but it will depend on the resources we have, and we can you can access it, of course. But we will. Did you subscribe to the mailing list, Italo?
Yes, I'm the mailing list.
So if you subscribe to the mailing list, you will receive the notification where to find the first video. I'm sorry, as our things are slowly kickstarting, we are step by step trying to find a way to make this more available publicly. But we are working on it, and you will be advised as soon as possible.
Thank you, Frederick, and congratulations for the tutorial.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
You're welcome. Thank you all, and talk to you next week then.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.